The invitation felt like a summons, a return to a life she had barely survived. Naomi Hayes was walking into her 10-year reunion with nothing but a second-hand dress and a business that was barely breaking even. Her ex-husband Marcus, the man who had taken everything, was there dripping in designer brands and armed with a cruel laugh. He pointed at her, his voice booming across the ballroom, mocking her for choosing meaning over money. The entire class laughed. Naomi stood alone, shaking until the doors opened and the most powerful man in the state walked right past her. X smiled and said, "Hi, sweetheart." The invitation was thick, creamy cardstock with embossed silver lettering. It felt expensive, which was Naomi Hayes thought the entire point. It was an artifact from a different world, a life she no longer lived. Northwood. High class of 15-year reunion. She'd been divorced from Marcus Vance for 3 years, but in the stale air of her small flower shop, petal and stem. The arrival of this invitation felt like the ripping open of a barely healed wound. Naomi wiped a smudge of potting soil from the Grand Oak Hotel logo. The Grand Oak. Of course. Marcus and his parents were members. He'd probably helped choose the venue specifically so he could hold court on his home turf. "You gonna go?" Naomi jumped. Her best friend and part-time employee, Chloe, was leaning against a rack of terracotta pots sipping a lukewarm coffee. I don't think so, Chloe. What's the point? To see who got richest, who aged the best. Naomi tossed the invitation onto her cluttered workbench next to a spool of silk ribbon and a pair of shears. "The point," Chloe said, pushing her glasses up her nose, "is to walk in there looking like the goddess you are and show them that living well is the best revenge. Not living rich, living well." Naomi sighed, her gaze drifting to her reflection in the shop window. She was 33. Her face was fine, she supposed, but there were faint lines of stress around her eyes that hadn't been there when she was Mrs. Vance. Her hands, her greatest pride, were calloused and often stained green from stems her nails kept short and practical. She wasn't the polished, manicured woman who used to host charity luncheons. She was a woman who worked with dirt. Marcus had hated it. Their marriage had been a whirlwind. He was the high school quarterback, the golden boy from a family with good bones and old money. She was the quiet, scholarship-winning, artsy girl. Their union was seen as a storybook romance, but the storybook was a facade. The reality was Marcus's stifling control, his obsession with appearances, and his casual cutting cruelty. The divorce had been brutal. He'd called her naive in court. "She has no concept of money, Your Honor. She wanted to open a flower shop." His lawyers had painted her as unstable, a dreamer incapable of existing in the real world he dominated. He'd kept the high-rise condo, the stocks, the country club membership. Naomi had walked away with her small savings and a fractured sense of self. She'd poured everything into petal and stem. It wasn't just a shop, it was her sanctuary. She didn't just sell flowers, she sold comfort. She made grief bouquets for the widowed and hope arrangements for new mothers. Her work had meaning, but meaning didn't pay the escalating rent on her storefront. She was struggling, deeply, and Marcus knew it. He still had friends who reported back, and she had no doubt he was eagerly awaiting the chance to see her fail. "He'll be there, Chloe, with her." Her was Jessica, the 20-something paralegal from his law firm who had become his executive assistant and almost immediately his fiancée. She was sleek, blonde, and hungry. "So what?" Chloe argued, stepping forward. "Let him be there. Let them both be there. You are Naomi Hayes. You built a business from nothing. You survived him. You owe it to yourself to go." The conversation replayed in Naomi's head all week. Every time she delivered an arrangement, she felt the dread. Every time she paid a bill, she felt the inadequacy. The reunion was a stage, and she was being forced to perform a role she didn't want, the failed ex-wife. On Friday, the night before the event, she found herself in a high-end consignment shop. She couldn't afford a new dress from the boutiques she used to frequent. She combed the racks, her fingers brushing past sequins and silk. And then she saw it. A simple navy blue sheath dress. It wasn't flashy. It had no designer label she recognized. But it was elegant, timeless, and most importantly on the 70% off rack. It's perfect, she whispered. It was the dress of a woman who wasn't trying to impress anyone. A woman who was simply herself. She bought the dress a pair of matching heels from a discount store and decided she would go. Not for them, not for Marcus, but for the woman who worked with dirt and built a life however small from the ashes of her old one. She would walk in, have one glass of mediocre champagne, and walk out with her head held high. That was the plan anyway. Plans, as she well knew, had a way of falling apart when they made contact with Marcus Vance. The Grand Oak Hotel smelled like old money and lilies. The scent, a cloying funereal aroma, hit Naomi the moment she stepped out of her 10-year-old Honda Civic. The valet, a young man with a carefully neutral expression, had looked at her car with a flicker of disdain before turning his attention to the gleaming black Porsche that pulled up behind her. Naomi clutched her small borrowed purse and walked under the grand portico. The Northwood High 15-year reunion sign was professionally printed, pointing her toward the main ballroom. Her heart wasn't just beating, it was hammering a trapped bird against her ribs. The navy dress felt good, but as she saw other women emerging from Escalades and Teslas draped in shimmering fabrics and dripping with diamonds, her simple sheath suddenly felt like a school uniform. She pushed open the heavy oak doors to the ballroom. The noise hit her first. A wave of loud chatter, shrill laughter, and the dull thud of a generic 2000s pop-punk song. The room was vast, dominated by a massive crystal chandelier that cast a glittering, unforgiving light on everyone. Groups were clustered like islands, clutching drinks, their heads swiveling, scanning and assessing. It was high school, but with more expensive alcohol. Naomi grabbed a flute of champagne from a passing waiter's tray and retreated to a corner, positioning herself behind a large potted palm. She took a sip. It tasted as cheap as she'd expected. Naomi Hayes, is that you?" Naomi stiffened. She turned to see Sarah Jenkins, now Sarah Petrov. In high school, Sarah had been the head of the gossip mill. Now she looked like she'd been sculpted from beige marble. Her blonde hair was pulled into a severe bun, her dress was a tight bandage-style number, and a formidable diamond ring glittered on her hand. "Sarah, hi. You look exactly the same," Naomi said, attempting a smile. "Oh, you're sweet." Sarah trilled, air-kissing the space near Naomi's cheek. "I've just been so busy with the foundation. My husband Dmitri, he insists I run it. It's exhausting." She leaned in, her perfume overwhelming. "My God, it's brave of you to come. I mean, after everything. We all heard." Brave. The word was a scalpel. "It's just a reunion, Sarah," Naomi said, keeping her voice level. Of course. Oh, look, there's Ben." Sarah waved frantically. Ben Carter, once a scrawny AV Club nerd, had clearly glowed up into a tech bro. He wore a blazer over an expensive t-shirt, his hair artfully messy. He was loud, gesticulating wildly as he talked. "And I told the VC, I said, if you don't 10x this seed round, you're missing the boat." And they did. Ben boomed, joining them. He glanced at Naomi. "Hey, Hayes. Long time." "Hi, Ben." "So," Ben said, his eyes doing a quick dismissive scan of her dress. "What are you up to? Still in town?" "I heard you. What was it?" "Opened a shop." "Yes. A floral design studio. Petal and stem." "Oh, cute. Cute," Ben said with the exact same inflection Marcus used. "My assistant handles all that for the office. We use one of those big subscription services, FTD or something. Streamlines the whole process." "My work is more bespoke," Naomi said, her grip tightening on her glass. Right. Bespoke." Ben clearly didn't know what to do with the word. He turned back to Sarah. "Listen, is he here yet?" "Who?" Sarah asked, her eyes lighting up. "Marcus, duh," Ben said. "He just closed a massive real estate deal. Bought out that old shipyard complex. Rumor is he's turning it into luxury lofts. The guy prints money." "He's not just here," Sarah whispered, nodding toward the entrance. "He's arrived." Naomi's breath hitched. She didn't need to turn around. She could feel the shift in the room's gravitational pull. Marcus Vance had entered the arena. He wasn't just dressed, he was curated. He wore a charcoal gray suit that was obviously custom-tailored, a silk tie, and on his wrist Naomi recognized the watch she had almost bankrupted them to buy him for their 5th anniversary, a Patek Philippe Calatrava. And on his arm was Jessica. She was stunning in a sharp, intimidating way. Her dress was fire engine red and cut low, her blonde hair sleek and center-parted. They looked less like a couple and more like a high-stakes merger. Marcus scanned the room, a practiced political smile on his face, a king surveying his court. He accepted a backslap from one of the old football players, kissed Sarah's hand, and then his eyes found Naomi. His smile didn't fade. It sharpened. It became something predatory. He had been waiting for this. He disengaged from Jessica, patting her on the arm, and began to walk toward Naomi. Every step on the polished floor echoed in her ears. The click Sarah, Ben, and a few others instinctively turned to watch. The music seemed to fade. The air grew thick and heavy. This wasn't a reunion. It was an execution. And she was the one on the scaffold. Marcus stopped a few feet from Naomi, a theatrical look of surprise on his face. He held a glass of what looked like expensive scotch, the ice clinking softly. "Well, well, Naomi Hayes. I honestly didn't think you'd have the nerve." His voice was exactly as she remembered, smooth, confident, and dripping with condescension. It was the same voice he'd used to tell her she was too sensitive when she cried, the same voice he'd used to charm the judge at their divorce hearing. "Hello, Marcus," Naomi said. Her own voice sounded thin, a pale thread in the rich tapestry of the ballroom. "It's Vance," Sarah Jenkins corrected from the sidelines, giggling. "Oh, wait, no, not for you. How awkward." Marcus chuckled, a low, appreciative sound. "It's fine, Sarah. We're all adults here. No hard feelings. Right, Naomi?" He took a step closer, invading her personal space. She could smell his cologne, the same Tom Ford scent she had bought him. "I'm just here to see old friends, Marcus. Please excuse me." She tried to step around him. He blocked her path, a casual, almost lazy movement. "Whoa, hold on. We're just catching up. We haven't seen each other since—" What was it? Oh, right, court. The group around them, Sarah, Ben, and 2 other former classmates Naomi barely remembered, laughed. It was an ugly sound. "This really is something," Marcus continued, gesturing at her with his glass. "You here, at the Grand Oak. Must be a change of pace from that. What do you call it, your studio, that little shoebox on Miller Street?" Naomi felt the blood drain from her face. He knew her street. He'd been keeping tabs. "It's a good location," she said, her nails digging into her palms. "Is it?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Because I heard you were—" How did my guy put it? "Struggling with overhead. Sounds fancy for going broke." "My business is fine, Marcus." "Is it?" He pressed, his smile widening. He was enjoying this. This was his sport. "Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're standing here alone in a—" What is that, by the way? Is that from that consignment shop you always loved? The one with the sad-looking mannequins? It was a direct hit. He'd recognized the type of clothing, if not the dress itself. He was telling her and everyone else that she was poor. She was wearing second-hand clothes. Sarah Jenkins let out a tiny, horrified gasp, her hand flying to her pearl necklace. Ben Carter just smirked, shaking his head. "Marcus, stop it," Naomi whispered, her voice shaking. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, creeping flush that spread from her neck to her cheeks. "Stop what? Stating facts." He swirled his scotch. "I'm just making an observation. You're the one who is always going on about meaning. Remember that our last big fight? I don't want all this money, Marcus. I want a life with meaning." He mimicked her voice in a high-pitched, mocking tone. The group roared. "Well, you got it, sweetheart." He sneered, the term of endearment now a poisoned dart. "You got your meaning." And I got the condo, the portfolio, and a new fiancé who understands that meaning is a luxury you earn. He pointed over to Jessica, who was now schmoozing with a local city councilman. See that's a VP at my new fund, Vance Capital Partners. We just closed a $40 million acquisition this morning. We're flying to a private island on Monday to celebrate. But hey, he turned back his face, a mask of false sympathy. You have your flowers. Naomi couldn't speak. Her throat was closed. Tears were burning the backs of her eyes, and she refused to let them fall. She would not give him the satisfaction. She was trapped. The circle of laughing faces was tightening around her. Ben, Sarah, all of them. They were feeding on her humiliation like sharks. I have to go, she managed, her voice cracking. "Aw, so soon," Marcus said, blocking her again. "But the party's just getting started. We haven't even talked about the old days. Remember when we were prom king and queen? You were so full of potential then. It's a shame to see how it all turned out." He reached out as if to touch her shoulder. Naomi flinched, recoiling as if struck. "Don't touch me." The words were sharp, and for a second the laughter died. Marcus's smile wavered, his eyes hardening from cruel amusement to genuine anger. "Touchy," he said, his voice dropping. "Still the same oversensitive Naomi. You know I did you a favor. I cut you loose. You would have drowned in my world. You're just not built for it. You're small. Your life is small." He leaned in, his voice a low hiss meant for her, but loud enough for the circle to hear. "You're a failure, Naomi, and everyone here knows it. Now run along. Go play with your daisies." He turned his back on her, a gesture of final, absolute dismissal. He raised his glass to the group. "Now who wants to hear about the shipyard deal?" The group's attention snapped back to him, the alpha, the winner. They laughed at his next joke, their backs now turned to Naomi. She was dismissed. Erased. She stood there frozen for a long second. The shame was suffocating. She could feel the stares of other people in the room who had witnessed the exchange. She was the reunion's tragic figure, the punchline. Her plan to hold her head high was in ruins. All she wanted was to disappear. Clutching her purse, Naomi turned and fled. She didn't run, but she walked as fast as she could, pushing through the crowd, ignoring the few people who tried to say hello. She made a beeline for the exit, but her path was blocked by a sudden commotion near the main entrance. She darted sideways, finding refuge in the relative quiet of a small alcove that led to a balcony. She leaned against the cool marble wall out of sight and finally let the tears come. They were hot, silent, angry tears. He had won. Again. He had taken her one night of bravery and shattered it into a million pieces. Naomi pressed her palms against the cold glass of the balcony door, taking deep, shuddering breaths. The muffled sounds of the party, the music, the laughter felt obscene. She was hiding, just as she had hidden in the high school library when Sarah Jenkins started a rumor about her, just as she had hidden in her car after the final mediation with Marcus. A text vibrated in her purse. It was Chloe. "Chloe, how's it going? Are you stunning them with your brilliance?" Naomi's fingers trembled as she typed back a single word. "Naomi." "No." She wiped her eyes, smearing her mascara. She had to leave. She could take the service exit, find her car, and drive home. She would lock the door, open a bottle of cheap wine, and pretend this night never happened. She was about to step out onto the balcony to get some air when the energy in the main ballroom behind her changed. It wasn't a sudden, loud event. It was a rapid decrease in volume, as if someone had slowly turned a dial on the room's ambient noise. The boisterous chatter faded into urgent, hushed whispers. The pop-punk song was abruptly cut off. Naomi turned, peering from her alcove back into the room. People were turning almost in unison toward the main entrance. Even the clique surrounding Marcus had dissolved. Marcus himself was standing on his toes, craning his neck, an expression of annoyance on his face at having lost his audience. "What is it?" Sarah Petrov whispered, tugging on Ben Carter's sleeve. I don't know, Ben muttered. Brenda said there was a special guest, a donor. Brenda Miller, the former head cheerleader and self-appointed reunion queen, was practically vibrating with nervous energy near the doorway. She was smoothing her sequined dress and checking her reflection in a mirrored pillar. A donor! Marcus scoffed, rejoining the group clearly irritated. Who the mayor I had dinner with him last week. No, Ben said, his eyes glued to the door. Bigger, much bigger. Brenda's been dropping hints all month that she was trying to get him. Him who? Marcus demanded. Patrick. Ben said, his voice dropping to a reverent hush. Thomas Patrick. The name hung in the air heavy and electric. Naomi froze. Thomas Patrick. Even Naomi in her small world of flowers and invoices knew that name. You couldn't live in this state and not know it. Patrick was a ghost, a myth. He was a local boy supposedly from their very own graduating class at Northwood, though no one could remember him. He had disappeared after graduation, gone to Caltech or MIT. The legends varied and emerged a decade later as the enigmatic founder of Patrick Dynamics. Patrick Dynamics wasn't just a company. It was an empire. It specialized in bleeding-edge AI logistics and renewable energy. Patrick had bought up half the state's commercial real estate, including the failing shipping conglomerate that Marcus had just bragged about acquiring a piece of. Patrick didn't just buy pieces. He bought everything. He was a recluse. No photos. No interviews. Time magazine had tried to name him Person of the Year, but they couldn't get a single comment and had to run a silhouette on the cover. He was rumored to be impossibly brilliant, famously ruthless, and pathologically private. And apparently he was a Northwood High alumnus. No way! Marcus breathed, his earlier arrogance replaced by a sudden hungry ambition. Patrick here. That's the rumor, Sarah whispered frantically, pulling a compact from her purse to check her lipstick. Dimitri has been trying to get a meeting with his investment arm for months. They won't even return his calls. This is it, Ben muttered, adjusting the knot of his non-existent tie on his t-shirt. This is the night. 5 minutes with Patrick. Just 5 minutes. Marcus was already in motion. His mind was clearly racing, the gears turning. He straightened his Patek Philippe, smoothed his lapels, and adopted a look of casual, confident importance. The humiliation of Naomi was forgotten, a mere appetizer. This was the main course. He'll need partners, Marcus said, more to himself than to the group. Local partners. People who know the infrastructure. My shipyard project. It's the key. He'll see that. Naomi watched this spectacle with a strange, detached sickness. They were predators, all of them circling a new, larger kill. The main doors of the ballroom, which had been propped open, were suddenly pulled wide by 2 hotel staffers in gold-braided uniforms. A hush fell. This time it was total. 2 men in dark, simple suits stepped in first. They were broad-shouldered, wore clear earpieces, and scanned the room with practiced, emotionless eyes. Security. And then he walked in. He wasn't what Naomi expected. He wasn't a flashy tech bro like Ben, or a polished old money type like Marcus. He was tall, dressed in a black Tom Ford suit, so perfectly tailored, it looked more like an extension of him than clothing. He had dark, unruly hair, sharp cheekbones, and intense, penetrating eyes that seemed to take in the entire room in a single dismissive glance. He didn't look like he was 33. He looked timeless. He moved with an economy of motion and absolute, unnerving stillness in a room buzzing with anxiety. This was not a man who hoped for things. This was a man who decided them. This was Thomas Patrick. Brenda Miller scurried forward, her hand outstretched, her smile painfully wide. Mr. Patrick, oh my goodness, we are so honored. I'm Brenda Miller. We spoke on the PH. Thomas Patrick walked right past her. His eyes didn't even flicker in her direction. He scanned the room. His gaze passed over the bar, over the dance floor, over the clusters of frozen, staring alumni. Marcus, Ben, and Sarah had formed a small phalanx, a reception committee of ambition. Marcus had his hand slightly raised, a friendly, welcome gesture, his local partner smile firmly in place. Patrick. Marcus began, his voice projecting across the silent room. Marcus Vance, I'm so glad you could make it. I'm the man behind the new shipyard loft. Thomas's gaze swept right past him as if he were a piece of furniture. His eyes continued to scan, searching, seeking, and then his eyes found the alcove. They found Naomi. The entire world snapped into sharp, terrifying focus. The intensity of his gaze softened just a fraction. The hard line of his mouth relaxed. He changed direction. He began to walk not toward the stage, not toward the bar, and certainly not toward Marcus Vance, whose hand was still hanging pathetically in the air. He walked directly toward the dark alcove where Naomi was hiding, her heart threatening to burst from her chest. Time seemed to slow down and stretch. The only sound in the vast ballroom was the quiet, measured click of Thomas Patrick's leather-soled shoes on the marble floor. Each step was a gavel silencing the room all over again. Naomi couldn't breathe. She was pinned by his gaze, a butterfly in a display case. She watched him cross the 50 feet that separated them, his 2 security guards fanning out slightly, creating an invisible perimeter. She saw Marcus's face out of the corner of her eye. His welcome smile had frozen, curdling into a mask of pure, unadulterated confusion. His hand, still half raised, looked ridiculous. Sarah Petrov's jaw was slack. Her perfectly lined lips parted in a silent O. Thomas didn't look at them. He didn't look at anyone. His focus was entirely, devastatingly on Naomi. He stopped 2 feet in front of her. Up close, he was even more intimidating. He was taller than she'd realized, and his eyes were a deep, dark brown. He looked tired, she thought. The lines around his eyes were more pronounced than they were on the phone. The entire reunion, 150 people, was staring. They were watching the reclusive billionaire who had ignored the welcoming committee, ignored the most successful men in the room, and cornered the reunion's resident failure in a dark alcove. Naomi could feel their thoughts. Is he going to have her thrown out? Does she work for the hotel? Did she do something wrong? Marcus, recovering slightly, started to move forward. Mr. Patrick, sir. I think you're mistaken. This is just... One of Thomas's security guards, without even looking at Marcus, put a hand up. A simple, flat palm. Marcus stopped dead, his face flushing crimson. Thomas's intense expression finally broke. A small, genuine smile. A smile Naomi knew well, touched the corners of his mouth, transforming his severe face into something warm, something human. He reached out not to shake her hand, but to gently touch her elbow. "Hi, sweetheart," he said. His voice was quiet, but in the dead silence of the room it carried like a gunshot. "I'm so sorry I'm late. The traffic from the airfield was terrible." Naomi finally let out the breath she had been holding. The hot tears of humiliation that still stained her cheeks were instantly replaced by a new, overwhelming wave of relief. She gave him a watery, shaky smile. "Thomas, you came." "I told you I would," he said softly. He glanced at her face, his smile fading as he registered the tear tracks and the redness in her eyes. "Are you all right? You look upset." I'm okay now," she whispered. His gaze hardened. He looked up, his eyes sweeping over the frozen tableau of the clique just a few feet away. He saw Marcus, his face a grotesque mask of shock and rage. He saw Sarah, her eyes wide with disbelief. He looked back at Naomi. "Who?" he asked. Just one word. Naomi didn't have to answer. Marcus, his brain finally processing the scene, sputtered. Sweetheart, what? Naomi, you know Thomas Patrick." Naomi straightened. The simple act of Thomas standing next to her, his hand still a warm protective pressure on her arm, felt like a suit of armor. She was no longer the small, failed flower shop owner. She turned her back to the alcove and faced her ex-husband. "Marcus Vance," she said, her voice clear and strong, finding its power for the first time in years. "I'd like you to meet my My friend. Thomas Patrick. Thomas, this is Marcus, my ex-husband. The words ex-husband landed with the force of a physical blow. Thomas Patrick's expression went from concern to a cold, dangerous calm. It was a stillness that was far more terrifying than any rage. His eyes locked onto Marcus. "Is that so?" Thomas said. It wasn't a question. He took a half-step forward, shielding Naomi slightly. "Marcus Vance, of Vance Capital Partners." Marcus was completely white. The Patek Philippe on his wrist seemed to tick with agonizing loudness. You've heard of my fund," he stammered, his mind clearly scrambling to find a new angle, a way to salvage this. "I've heard of it," Thomas said, his voice flat and cold. "My risk assessment team flagged it last month. Over-leveraged, volatile, and based on projections that border on fantasy. My chief analyst advised me to stay far, far away. It was a complete clinical and brutal dismantling. In 20 seconds, Thomas Patrick had declared Marcus's entire career, his entire identity, a sham. Ben Carter looked like he was going to be sick. Sarah Petrov actually took a step backward, as if the failure was contagious. "Now," Thomas continued, his voice dropping, "Ms. Hayes looks upset, and I find her standing in a corner just after you and your friends." He gestured to the clique. "We're speaking with her, so I'm going to ask you once. What did you say to her?" Marcus couldn't speak. He opened and closed his mouth, but no sound came out. The king had been dethroned. The man who had built his world on public perception had just been publicly annihilated by the only man in the room who mattered. "Thomas," Naomi said, touching his sleeve. "Please, it doesn't matter. Can we just go?" Thomas looked at her, and the coldness in his eyes evaporated, replaced by the warmth she knew. "Of course," he nodded. "Of course. We have reservations." He turned, putting a guiding hand on the small of Naomi's back. He started to lead her toward the main exit, his security team falling into step, clearing a path through the stunned, frozen crowd. They walked directly past Marcus. Thomas paused for one fleeting second, close enough to speak without raising his voice. "Mr. Vance," he said. Marcus flinched. "You were wrong about meaning. It isn't a luxury. It's the only currency that actually lasts. You should try acquiring some, though I doubt it's an asset your fund could handle." He didn't wait for a reply. He and Naomi walked out of the ballroom, the heavy oak doors closing behind them with a soft, final thud. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound in the room was the returning tinny sound of the 2000s pop song the DJ had finally frantically put back on. Then Sarah Petrov, her voice a high-pitched, incredulous squeak, broke the silence. "Oh, my God." Marcus Vance just stood there, his face ashen, his scotch glass still in his hand. He was ruined, and everyone had seen it. The air outside the hotel was cool and clean. Naomi took her first deep breath of the night, and it felt like she was breathing for the first time in a decade. The valet who had disdained her Honda was now practically bowing as one of Thomas's security guards opened the rear door of a black, impossibly sleek Bentley Mulsanne. Naomi slid onto the plush leather seat. Thomas followed, and the door closed, encasing them in a world of profound, luxurious silence. The car pulled away from the curb so smoothly she barely felt the motion. She looked at Thomas. He was loosening his tie, the hard lines of his face softening in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. "Are you really okay?" he asked, his voice full of genuine concern. Naomi laughed. It was a real laugh bubbling up from a place of pure, giddy relief. "I am now. My God, Thomas. Your timing. I told you I'd be there by 9, he said, checking his watch. "It's 9:04. I apologize." "Don't. Please don't." She shook her head, the adrenaline finally beginning to ebb, leaving her trembling. You heard him, didn't you? What he called me." Thomas's expression darkened. "I heard, sweetheart. It was presumptuous of him." "It's what he called me when he was about to be his cruelest, Naomi whispered. "And then you called me the same thing. You reclaimed it." He looked at her, his dark eyes serious. "It's what you are." They drove in comfortable silence for a few moments, the city lights blurring past the tinted windows. "How did you know?" Naomi asked. "How did you know?" "About his fund, over-leveraged." Thomas shrugged as if it were nothing. "When you told me your ex-husband's name last week, I had my team run a standard background diligence. I don't like surprises." He paused. "The man's a peacock. He's built a fantasy on short-term debt and market speculation. He was going to implode within 6 months anyway. I just pointed it out." Naomi stared at him. "You had him run." "It's just protocol, Naomi. I have to know who is in my orbit. And," he added, his voice softer, "I have to know who hurt you." The immensity of his world, a world where a person could be run like a stock analysis, was dizzying. But the motive behind it, that was purely simply protective. She had met him on the worst day of her life. It was a year ago, 6 months after her business had almost gone bankrupt. A man had walked into Petal and Stem on a rainy Tuesday. Naomi hadn't recognized him. He wasn't a billionaire. He was just a man in a gray hoodie and jeans, his face haggard with grief. He'd stood in the middle of her shop, looking lost. I need flowers," he had stammered. "For a hospital." Naomi, seeing the raw pain in his eyes, had stopped misting her ferns. "Tell me about her," she had said gently. He'd talked for an hour. His name was Thomas. His younger sister Clara was in hospice. She had cancer. She was fading. He didn't know what to do. He was the fixer, and this was the one thing he couldn't fix. Naomi hadn't tried to sell him the most expensive roses. She'd listened. She'd learned that Clara loved the smell of the woods after a rain, that her favorite color was pale yellow. Naomi had made an arrangement of delicate yellow freesias for joy pine and rosemary for remembrance, and a strong, beautiful life, and soft, mossy green ferns. She'd called it Clara's Walk. Thomas had paid in cash and left. He came back a week later. His suit was dark, his eyes red-rimmed. Clara had passed. She loved them," he'd said, his voice thick. "She woke up for a few minutes, and she smiled. She said it smelled like home. It was the last beautiful thing she saw. Thank you." He'd stood there, this powerful broken man, and wept in her little flower shop. Naomi had made him tea, and just sat with him saying nothing. After that he'd become a regular. First it was just Thomas, the quiet, sad man who ordered flowers for his sister's grave. Then he started ordering massive arrangements for his office. "I hate the sterile feel," he'd said. "I want it to feel like this, like your shop." Patrick Dynamics became her biggest client, their weekly orders single-handedly pulling her out of debt. But he never acted like her client. He'd come by the shop himself in his hoodie, and they would talk. About books. About philosophy. About his work in AI and her work in emotional floristry, as he'd dubbed it. He was the only person who had ever understood her obsession with meaning. To him, it wasn't a flaw. It was a data point he couldn't quantify, and was therefore fascinated by. Their friendship had slowly, tentatively become something more. The first time he'd held her hand, it had felt as electric as his arrival at the reunion. He'd invited her to dinner just last week. He'd called her sweetheart for the first time 2 nights ago on the phone when she'd been agonizing over whether to even go to the reunion. "You should go," he'd said. "You have nothing to be ashamed of, and I'll come with you. I'm an alumnus, you know. I should probably show my face once every 2 decades. She hadn't truly believed he would show. A man who ran an empire taking time to walk into a high school reunion, it seemed impossible. But he had. "Where are we going?" Naomi asked as the Bentley turned onto a private tree-lined road. "Dinner. I made reservations." "Thomas? It's 9:30. At the Grand Oak they'll be closed." Thomas smiled. "We're not going to the Grand Oak." The car pulled up to a small private airfield. A sleek silver Gulfstream G650 sat on the tarmac, its lights on the stairway already down. "Thomas," Naomi breathed. "What?" "The reservations," he said, taking her hand as the driver opened the door, "are in Paris. I'm told the bistro I booked has the best soufflé in the world. And I figured, you deserve the best." Naomi looked at the jet, then back at the man who just a year ago had been a stranger crying in her shop. "Paris," she whispered. "You said you always wanted to see the flower markets there," he said simply. "So let's go." The aftermath of that night was not a loud explosion but a deep structural collapse. The story of the reunion spread with the speed of a digital brushfire, but the social embarrassment was merely the symptom of a much larger disease. By 10:00 a.m. on Saturday, the staff at the Grand Oak valets, waiters, and event managers had already relayed the Patrick Vance confrontation to at least 3 different local gossip columns. But the true execution was colder, quieter, and far more professional. At 8:01 a.m. on Monday, an anonymous data-rich file was delivered to the regional office of the Securities and Exchange Commission. It wasn't a tip, it was a fully formed indictment. It detailed a precise pattern of leveraging unverified assets, misrepresenting liquidity, and basing entire fund projections on speculative real estate ventures that had not yet broken ground. It was exactly what Thomas had called it, a fantasy. The audit wasn't a question of if, but how fast. The investors who had been in the ballroom, the ones who had personally witnessed Thomas Patrick, a man whose market moves were gospel, surgically dismantle Marcus's reputation, didn't wait. The calls began Monday at 9:00 a.m. "Marcus, about that last capital call, we're going to hold." "Mark, listen, my partners are feeling exposed. We need to liquidate our position." By Wednesday, 70% of his liquid assets had been withdrawn, triggering a covenant breach with his primary lenders. The personal fallout was just as swift. Jessica, his sharp, ambitious fiancée, didn't have a dramatic shouting exit. She was far too practical for that. She simply didn't come home from work on Tuesday. A text message arrived that evening. "My lawyer will be in touch regarding my share of the condo and the funds I invested in your shipyard project. Do not contact me." The Patek Philippe was sold by Friday not to cover the massive cascading debts, but to pay the retainer for his new, less prestigious legal team. The shipyard loft project, his crown jewel, was seized. Marcus Vance, the golden boy, the king, was ruined. He was a ghost in his own life, a living cautionary tale whispered about at the country clubs he could no longer enter. Thomas had been right. He hadn't needed to push. He just needed to shine a light, and the rot built on arrogance and debt was plain for everyone to see. The lesser predators of that night faced their own smaller reckonings. Sarah Petrov, a creature of pure social association, was terrified. She had been seen not just with Marcus, but actively participating in the humiliation. She scrambled. On Thursday, a frantic 14-line email arrived at the Petal and Stem generic inbox. "Naomi, darling, it was marvelous to see you. You and Mr. Patrick. Just a power couple. I've always adored you, you know that. I'm having a small, tiny get-together for Dimitri's partners, and I need the entire house done. Think. Forgiveness and old, deep friendships. White peonies, orchids, whatever you think is best. Money is no object." Naomi read the email, a small wry smile playing on her lips. Chloe peered over her shoulder. Oh, now she wants old, deep friendships. That woman has the moral compass of a magpie. "She wants flowers, Chloe." "We sell flowers," Naomi said. She personally selected every stem. They were flawless, the most expensive and austere white orchids in her inventory. She arranged them in severe minimalist glass vases. They were breathtakingly beautiful but undeniably cold. They were exactly what Sarah had asked for a statement. Naomi had them delivered by a professional courier and sent a 4-figure invoice due upon receipt. She never replied to the email personally, and she never received a text about lunch. The transaction was professional, final, and deeply satisfying. Ben Carter simply ceased to be. His LinkedIn profile was deactivated. The rumor was that he'd taken a mid-level coding job back at some faceless corporation. The 10X man had been reduced to a 0. Naomi's future, however, wasn't being written by her past. It was being written in a 24-hour diner. The scene on the tarmac after they'd left the reunion replayed in her mind. She had said no to Paris. "Thomas," she'd said, standing at the base of the jet stairway, the engines a low, powerful whine. "I can't. That's your world. The jet, the bistro. It's incredible. But it's not me. I'm the woman in the consignment dress. And I'm finally okay with that. This feels like I'm stepping into Marcus's world, just a bigger version." He had looked at her, a strange, calculating expression on his face. Then he'd nodded, a look of dawning, intense understanding. "You're right," he'd said, his voice firm. "My mistake. I was trying to give you a grand gesture. I forgot that you are the grand gesture. You don't need rescuing." He'd taken her hand. "But I'm still hungry. Do you know a place that's open? I could really go for some pancakes." So they had ended up at the Starlight Diner, a neon-lit relic from the 1970s. Naomi sat in a cracked vinyl booth, her navy blue dress feeling perfectly appropriate. Thomas sat opposite, his $10,000 Tom Ford suit utterly conspicuous, and he couldn't have cared less. He'd ordered pancakes, a side of bacon, and black coffee. Naomi got a grilled cheese and a chocolate shake. "So," she'd said, dipping a fry in her shake, "my ex-husband thinks I'm a failure, and you're you." "He's a data point in a failed set," Thomas said, neatly cutting his pancakes. "He's irrelevant. Tell me about your new hybrid rose, the Clara's Dawn you were trying to cultivate. You were having trouble with the grafting." For 2 hours they talked. He explained the ethical dilemma of a predictive AI he was developing, how he feared it could eliminate human choice. She explained the precise meaning of aconite, a beautiful flower that was also a deadly poison. They didn't talk about Marcus. They didn't talk about the reunion. They talked about things that mattered. It was without question the best date of her life. Thomas didn't save her shop. He knew that would be an insult. He didn't write her a check or buy her a new building. He simply amplified her. The Forbes interview dropped a month later. It was a bombshell in the financial world. Thomas Patrick the Ghost was speaking. The journalist had clearly tried to get him to talk about his market projections, his next acquisition. Thomas had pivoted. "Your readers want to know my secret," the quote began. "My secret isn't an algorithm. It's a change in metrics. For years I measured success in zeros. Then I met a woman who was measuring it in human connection. My most valuable consultant isn't on my payroll. She's a floral designer named Naomi Hayes. She runs a small shop called Petal and Stem." The article continued. "I went to her at my lowest point, and I was trying to solve grief to win it. Naomi taught me that grief is a state to be moved through, not a problem to be fixed. She operates on a currency of empathy, of meaning. It's a metric my AI can't process, and it's more powerful than any line of code I've ever written. We're all building systems, but she's building solace. She's the most successful person I know." Chloe found the article, her phone shaking in her hand. "Naomi, you need to see this." Naomi read it, and for the first time since the divorce she cried. Not tears of shame or anger, but of overwhelming, profound validation. The phone started ringing at 10:00 a.m. It did not stop. It wasn't just Sarah Petrov. It was corporate HQs in New York asking for empathy installations for their sterile lobbies. It was a chain of hospice centers in California wanting to license her grief bouquet concepts. It was a publisher from London offering a 6-figure advance for a book on the philosophy of floristry. She hired Chloe as her chief operating officer with a salary and benefits package that made Chloe weep. She hired 5 more designers. She moved Petal and Stem from the small storefront to a massive light-filled brick warehouse by the old canal, a building she later learned Thomas had quietly bought through a holding company and leased to her at a rate just above market, so she would never feel like a charity case. 1 year to the day after the reunion, Naomi was in her new studio. The space was filled with sunlight, the smell of damp earth, and the low murmur of 20 students. She was teaching. "Don't just place the stem," she was saying, moving through the tables, her hands covered in soil. "Listen to it. The curve of a delphinium is about reaching. The weight of a peony is about acceptance. Don't force them. Your job is to find their story and help them tell it." The bell on the front door chimed. Thomas walked in wearing his familiar gray hoodie and jeans. He looked like any other customer save for the quiet intensity of his gaze. He leaned against her old workbench, which she'd insisted on keeping in the center of the studio. He was holding a small, greasy paper bag. Naomi saw him and her face lit up a genuine, unguarded smile. "Class is almost done," she mouthed. "No rush," he mouthed back, holding up the bag. "Grilled cheese. Extra crispy." He just watched. He watched this woman who had been mocked for choosing meaning, now commanding a room, building an empire from that very concept. She was radiant, confident, and grounded. She was not the polished wife Marcus had tried to sculpt. She was not the broken woman in the consignment dress. She was Naomi Hayes. As she laughed at a student's question, her hands stained with dirt, Thomas felt a profound sense of peace. He, the man who could buy and sell cities, knew with absolute quantifiable certainty that he was the richer one in the relationship. She hadn't needed his money or his power. She had just needed the space to grow. And he in turn had found the one thing he couldn't build: a home. And so Naomi's story shows us a powerful truth: the world will always try to tell you what success looks like. People like Marcus will always measure life by watch brands and bank accounts. But real value, the kind that lasts, is built from something different. It's built from integrity, from kindness, and from staying true to your own meaning, even when you're standing alone. Naomi's greatest victory wasn't the billionaire who came to her rescue. It was that when he did arrive, he found a woman who had already built the very thing his money couldn't buy. What did you think of Marcus's downfall? And what's the best revenge, success, or just being happy? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love this story of justice and finding strength, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe for more real-life drama every week. Thank you for listening.